and I think that for me, whilst having said how complicated and diverse it is, if I'm trying to express what suicide is in its simplest way, then the way I understand it is a person that is experiencing too much pain, that they don't know how to regulate it, how to cope with it, and that in that immersion of pain, intensity of pain, it can feel in certain moments like suicide is the only way with which to resolve or find relief from that pain. So for me, suicide is a crisis in a way of pain management.
Hey everybody, how you doing? Welcome back to the Another Nobody podcast with me, your favorite nobody, Travis Myers. Today we have a very special guest, Dr. Susanna Bennett, PhD, who is a fellow at the University of Glasgow in Scotland. She is a Master of Science there, and her main focus of study and research is male suicide. A fairly miserable topic, I know, but one that absolutely needs to be addressed because we all have a man or boy in our lives who may be at risk. Because I guarantee you, it is more common than you probably think. I know the numbers shocked me. So, here we go. Dr. Susie Bennett on the Another Nobody Show. Dr. Susie Bennett, how are you, dear? So happy to finally sit down with you. How you been?
Me too, Travis. I've been really looking forward to this.
Yes, yes. I tell you, after I did I should, shame on me. I should know what the number is. Um, Several weeks ago, I did a show with our mutual friend, George of the Tin Men,
Mhm, mhm,
and, your name came up, and I was like, Dr. Susie, I know that name because I had read some of your work from, I don't know, a couple of years ago, and I remember, well, I personally, I just thought you were brilliant. I really liked what I had read and the way you would put things and your understanding
mm,
of, you know, men and men's problems and,
yeah.
the potential for men's suicide and, of course, everything to do with men's suicide, which sadly we're here to talk about today.
Yeah. Thank you, Travis. That means a lot because you do the work. The purpose of the work is to try and, or the purpose of the work for me has always been to try and help people understand this experience more, whether it's for themselves because they need that understanding to manage the feeling. It's a feeling that they feel, or other people that are worried about other people, and so it's always nice for me to hear that it trans it's translating and it makes sense and people feel in it resonances of truth in relation to their own kind of lived experiences. So thank you.
Oh, no, absolutely. Well, again, your research and now so our listeners understand,
Hmm.
you are a fellow at the University of Glasgow in Scotland, correct?
Yes, so they have there's a research lab there led by Professor Rory O'Connor, who's been in the field for decades and done really significant work, and he runs a suicide behavior research lab that I am part of. And then my work is specifically and always has been on suicide in men. So that's the aspects of suicide that I'm sort of very engaged with trying to understand better.
And can I ask you just, not that it's an odd thing, but what drew you to this field in particular? Was there something, you know, uh, something in your life or an experience that said,
Mm,
"This is something that I'm very
mm.
interested."
I mean, I've had challenges with my own mental health, and I definitely have had thoughts and feelings of suicide at multiple points throughout my life. I would say that the first kind of really serious experience when I was probably around 18, and then the last time probably a month ago, Travis. So
Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that, dear.
it's echoed through my life. I've also, within my sibling group, there's been a lot of mental health challenges and previous suicide attempts. So for me, it was a real personal kind of mission. As a family, having gone through the experience of trying to get help and feeling like we've just been left to drown because the help wasn't available, accessible, sufficient enough. I really needed a place, Travis, to put my pain because I was kind of over brimming with it. And for me, it was really once I realized that statistic around that suicide is the biggest killer of men under 50. And the when I did my first kind of study looking at male suicide was in 2018, and it was around the kind of time when there was this big explosion of the Me Too movement and this big public conversation about male privilege, male power, and this real kind of lens on men as having all the advantages. And so I was hearing that on one side, and then seeing this statistic of like what was killing men under 50 at the
Yes.
highest rates was deaths of despair, and I thought there's something between these 2, um, reality you know, projected, realities. I mean, this opinions and the statistics are,
Well,
this,
that's exactly what it hit me about the first time that I had heard of you. Again, I can't remember exactly what it was that I had read, maybe 2 years ago or something. I stumbled across your work. Um, and the 2 things that really had shocked me, one was that, you know, here in the United States, it's 80%, but in
mhm,
your nation, the UK, it's 75% of suicides are men, which really surprised me. I talked about again to our friend George about this.
yeah,
It really surprised me because had you told me 60-40, I would have bought that immediately, but 80% just seems like a really high number. And then couple that with, what did we just say before? That, it's the leading cause of death for men under 50. I would have immediately thought, car accidents. That just
mhm,
makes sense to me. Something sensible, but taking your own
mm,
life
yeah,
as the number 1 cause of death for somebody, you know, under the age of 50 is shocking. It's absolutely shocking to
mhm.
me. Again, that was something that I learned from you. I don't know exactly when again. I'm sorry I can't remember. But no, you really turned me on to that, and
I was just gonna say it should be a statistic that sort of shatters the soul of a society.
yes.
Do you know what I mean? Like the reality of what we're saying, that
Yes.
particularly in sort of a Western culture of so much sort of um, material wealth comparatively, that you have men dying of too much pain, too much psychological internal pain that they don't know how to cope with. You would have thought that as a society, as cultures, that would be such an arresting and distressing reality that it would provoke, therefore, a lot of collective reflection and a
Mhm.
collective desire to want to understand as compassionate beings, which I really believe the majority of us are, to understand how that can be so, and what more we can do collectively to try and change that reality, because it says something. There's such a clear question in the suicide stats that's sorry, provoked by the suicide stats around what is it about the male experience that is putting men at risk? When you have almost every country in the world, men dying at higher rates. And if you look back historically through time, that's relatively consistent through recording of suicide statistics as well. So there's a lot of evidence now that you think would have made those questions much more pressing than they seem to be.
Well, it is for me. I think that's part of the shocking thing is that, shame on me again. I'm a grown, experienced man. I have a lifetime of, you know, uh, shall I say, more experiences than most people. Um,
Mm,
and I was really, really surprised at those numbers. And then the more I've looked into it and learned about it, it seems that well, there was a thing we just mentioned before we went on air here, a new a new term that's new to me, it might not be to you, the disposable man or the disposable male, where there doesn't seem to be a lot of concern. Back to the U2 movement, I'm not
Yeah,
denying that there
yeah,
weren't certainly that
yeah,
women
yeah,
don't have miles and miles of problems of their own.
yeah,
However, this is one that is been completely swept under the rug that
yes,
nobody knows about. When I
yeah.
say this to other people, to my friends, relatives, people I know in conversation, nobody can believe the number, the 80% number is shocking to them.
And Travis, this is the sort of zero sum thinking that can sometimes happen around men's issues. That if I'm talking about male pain, that I'm in some way saying that women don't suffer, which is of course it's this positioning of like it
Yeah,
has to be men versus women. When I always say my well-being as a woman in the world totally is related to the men that I love being well as well.
of
It's not
course.
me versus them. We're all, we're
No,
so deeply entwined. And I think that shifting that mindset to understand that if my brothers are in pain, I'm in pain. And male suicide isn't about something that's happening to men, it's something that's happening to all of us is, really, really important. And I think that it's, I think, Travis, at the heart of this, in some ways, is this empathy gap that exists in relation to male pain. And I think until we, at a societal, cultural, community level, really grapple with that, acknowledge that, and transform that, um, I see it, Travis, even on the news. You can turn on the news any night, sadly, with all the things going on in the world, and you'll hear reporting of, let's say, deaths in conflict. So you'll hear reporting about the women and children that have died in Gaza. Now, men have died in Gaza this day as well,
absolutely.
but it doesn't even get mentioned. And I was thinking, I was trying to imagine, during COVID, for example, if on the news they reported the number of white people that had died of COVID and didn't mention any other ethnicity, we'd
Yes,
go, you can't. That's you can't. That's abhorrent to
yes.
not be, it's such a denial of other people's of humanity in people. But we're okay in doing that. I'm taking one very specific example just to show how um, pervasive it is
Yes.
in the way that we think and talk about men. The male deaths aren't even, because the implicit assumption is that it's sadder that women and children have died, that
Oh,
should
well, yes.
somehow,
Well, I think there's a cultural thing, and I'm guilty of it myself because I will admittedly say it. I am a woman and children first kinda guy.
okay, yeah,
I mean, I can't help it, it was part of my life, part of the idea of being a paratrooper, or being a police officer, or being a father, I absolutely, I am, you know, it's part of I'm not even gonna say Western culture, it seems to be
yes,
culture worldwide, it's the way we were built, since we were animals, even in the wild kingdom today, the alpha male of the wolf pack is gonna stick up for the women and children and protect them, and
oh,
so I think that's built into us, naturally, you know, but now that we live in a much more civilized society, I guess I should say, um, we have, again, kind of forgotten men, in the popular sense. I don't know what word I wanna use there, but I was just watching a thing post the other day, and unfortunately, the doctor's name wasn't listed on this particular post. He was doing a thing about female suicide, and so I paid attention to it. Was just a little short, 3-minute post thing that you see on YouTube,
right,
and he was talking about a spike in it. But now that I know the true numbers, I actually, and this is by no means should be a competition between the sexes, but I was like, "Man, why aren't you talking about the 80%
Mm,
of suicides that are men?"
mm,
As opposed to how he's seeing more problem with women in their 20s and 30s, which again absolutely should be addressed, but never, ever, ever outside of you and George of the Tin Men have I heard anybody discuss
okay. Yeah,
the 80% number when it comes to
yeah,
men. And so there
yeah.
is, like I say, is it the disposable male is let's explore that a little bit. What do you think of it? Why are we is it just, the cultures through the millennial that we've decided this?
I think that I mean, one of the most interesting ideas that I've read about in relation to what we're talking about is this. It's a theory called gamma bias, which George may have mentioned by this two psychologists called John Barry and Martin Seeger, and it's this idea that our empathy, so the feelings of empathy that I feel, that you feel, get conditioned by what our society tells us about
Mhm,
who we should feel empathy for. Um, in the same ways, for example, in my culture, we probably have much more empathy towards dogs than we would do for, another kind of animal, because
yes.
that's how we've been socialized and raised. And their idea is that our empathy is conditioned to um, be more aware of kind of seeing men as privileged, as men as powerful, as men as causing harm, than we are to seeing men as disadvantaged of as being harmed by life. And I see that all the time. I think often when people talk about men or think about men, they sort of pick up a telescope and look at men with through the lens of the worst men that they've known.
Mhm.
And of course, that then shapes and colors your perspective and viewpoint on things. And for me, part of the transformation of the work, for me personally, has been around excavating my own gender biases, which ran very deep, Travis, much more deeper than I knew. And I think in the way that we need to excavate those biases for, Travis, nobody I didn't when I was born, I didn't get to choose what cultural ideas I got,
Sure.
socialized in. So it's not in any way sort of necessarily it's um, placing blame on anybody, but it's to bring ourselves into richer union with one another. I think we really have to reflect on the way in which these biases can create barriers without us even knowing. And I read something interesting, and I'd love to know your view on it, Travis, was about sort of looking at a historical lens on where, for example, the cultural idea of emotional suppression, male emotional suppression, came from. And they were sort of suggesting that you could root it back to when societies became very industrialized and there was heavy industry and there was large scale wars, and that if you were going to call upon a group of people to risk their life every day, whether that was through going down the mines or going, you know, to war, encouraging them to suppress their emotions was a useful strategy for society, long-term kind of at least material benefit. And so they were kind of rooting these ideas of emotional suppression back to like I say, the emergence of big industry and wars. But I mean, Travis, you've been in environments that, well, incredibly dangerous places, and I'm sure experienced or come into contact with a lot of men who've had very, very difficult lives and life circumstances and conditions. Men that you wouldn't look at and go, "Wow, you have a lot of power and a lot of privilege."
But no, in fact, quite often I think being, as they say, a working class people, all
Mm,
right? we don't, as men, quite often feel that we have any
Mm,
privilege, to be honest with you, you know? We may, yes, be the head of the household within our families if we have families, you know? We may hold a position in our jobs, but I think the vast majority of men probably do feel quite vulnerable to the world, and in 2 ways. One, getting back to the cultural thing, I think maybe this might be what you're getting at. One, in that, yes, we are, uh, uh, vulnerable because we are poor, and when I say poor, not necessarily destitute poor, but we are working people. We are the substratus, if you will, as opposed to everyone who is wealthy or well-to-do, right? But at the same time, we're more vulnerable because as the men, we feel, and it may
mm,
not always be the case, but we feel that we carry the largest burden of our families, be it as the patriarch. I don't know, today being the patriarch is the
right.
bad
Yeah.
word. We're supposed to fight the patriarchy, right? However, you know, it is, you still are, for lack of a better word, the head of the household. You have to be able to go out and do the work. You have to put in the hours no matter what they are, you know?
Mm,
You have to take a knee to your boss and his boss and his boss because you're a working man, you know? And the stress can be quite, quite high, you know?
mm,
And you do all of this, and yes, we absolutely do it for ourselves, but more so for our wives and children.
mm,
Because if we didn't have the wives and children, okay, the families to take care of, and or even, you know, as I did, we took care of my mother-in-law and my own mother in their last days. So there's
mm,
a responsibility that we feel that we need to live up to, that we need to put forth, and rightfully so. When I say these things, I think it is the right thing to do, and again, maybe I am being a bit of a caveman, or maybe I am part of that patriarchal problem, but I do, again, back to women and children first, I see the world in that way. So, does that give me more stress? Possibly than, my wife
mm,
or other members of the family? I would say yes. And I think that my son will carry that burden as well with his family. But I think it's
mm,
our burden to carry. I do rightfully believe that. Okay.
mm.
And so I want you to give me a comeback on that. But what I
Yeah.
don't wanna lose, and what we're gonna touch on next, so bring it back to me in case I forget, is how much of this is cultural and how much of it is mental health. But first, beat me up on my last statement there. What you think?
I'm not gonna beat you up. I think I think that there's a, like, complex tapestry of, desires and aspirations and drives and purposes that, create any society or culture. I think the pressure and stress that you're talking about, I think for many men is a deep reality of that feeling of, carrying huge amounts, and when the weight of that feels acutely heavy, feeling like there's no space to get to
Yes.
turn to someone and go, "I think this thing is getting to the point that it's drowning me." And the isolation and loneliness that can, come from that is really, an awful, awful, awful thing. And I think that the desire to protect and provide is a beautiful thing. And I think that it's a sort of genderless, um, desire, but it may manifest in different ways. I think it's very difficult, Travis, to, unless we did an experiment where we took people from conception and raised them in, very controlled environments, to really understand kind of how much is culture and how much is a kind of deep, um, biological, um, disposition towards something. Um, but I do think, certainly in terms of, male suicide, one of the things that comes up a lot is feelings of failure.
Yes,
Is
absolutely.
it is feelings like there are real markers of what makes a successful man and feeling like you are not hitting those markers. And
Right.
then, Travis, what's really, I think, most heartbreaking is a kind of leap then from if I'm not hitting those markers, I have no value.
Mhm.
And that for me is so kind of, desperately sad and, and
Well,
painful to wrestle
here's the
with.
thing too, I don't wanna cut you off, but here's the thing too, 'cause I think it's kinda pertains to this, and back to I do not believe that there shouldn't be a competition between men and women on this subject, but it is what we're talking about. But there is a funny thing now, if you are a single mother, my mother, for instance, was a single mother for, I don't know, about 4 or 5 years. She had, you know, a couple of kids she was raising in New York City by
Mm,
herself after my father had abandoned us at 11, before she met the man who would become my stepfather, who was a phenomenal guy. He was from England himself. He was a little Cockney
okay.
fella who had moved to New York and met my mother, and, they fell wildly in love and lived together until, they both passed. But if you have a single mother who raises her children alone, she's a strong woman.
Yeah,
She's a great woman.
yeah,
She is something special. If you have a man who takes care of his family, he's doing what he's supposed to do.
right. Yeah,
There's no pat on the back for
yeah,
doing what you're supposed to do. It's the same thing, like, we'll always look at, until the last 20 years or so, people have always looked up to the soldier or the policeman or the fireman or, whatever, the astronaut. Give me something like that that's,
yeah,
heroic, manly. It's a very strong, manly
mm,
thing to do. Nobody gives a shit about the construction worker who goes to work
uh,
every day and works so very, very hard, physically hard. So
uh,
much so that by the time he's in his mid-40s, he's an old
his
man.
body's
His
taking down,
joints
yeah,
don't work, his back doesn't work, and he's not retiring in his 40s. He's got another 20 years to go, you know? Guys who do tremendous jobs. And then even the guy who may work, he may be an accountant or work at a bank or have a rather nondescript, boring job, but he's got to go in 40, 50 a week, 40, 50 hours a week, excuse me, usually to a job that he absolutely hates,
yeah,
but he does it because it's the right thing to do. He doesn't leave this job that he hates because he's got to put food on the table. And I'm not saying that women don't do this either, but the thing is, if a woman does it, in today's day and age, she's a career woman. She's got it going on. She's doing so, and if a man does it, he's just doing what he's supposed to do. Bang, that's
yeah.
it. So
I feel, yeah,
I can see culturally how this can wear many men down,
yeah.
if you will. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say that I think what you're saying, Travis, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that there's not much, public or kind of social recognition of or positive recognition of the contribution that men are making to their families, communities, societies,
Correct.
um,
Well,
and that void of validation and affirmation
in respect.
becomes a source of pain in itself, or can do.
Yeah. There's a I wish I could remember the writer, and I know I'm gonna get the quote wrong anyway. Um, oh, how does it go? It's something like, no one what is it? No one knows that the old men die, but the old men. And I'm
Wow.
getting it wrong, but it's a much more poetic quote than what I just said, and, shame on me for not knowing it, but I wasn't prepared for today. Um, but, if again, you go to a local pub and you have, a group of iron workers in there, they all know how hard they work,
Yeah,
you know?
yeah, yeah,
But
yeah,
society as a whole doesn't. The
yeah,
media certainly doesn't. You turn on the news today, they could care less about the poor guys who are working in the subways, the poor guys that are cleaning windows on the big skyscrapers. You name it, coal miners, things like this who get zero respect. There might be a song written about them, you know,
Yeah.
but other than that, they're still doing that job every day,
Mm. And it's
every single
brutal
day.
work.
It's nice when you can turn around and turn your lights on.
Yeah.
Somebody did that,
Yeah. Yeah.
somebody, some men somewhere are making sure those wires are up and working for you.
Yeah.
And when it goes down because of bad weather, like here in America, we had the giant snowstorms and rainstorms and thunderstorms. Those guys are out there fixing those wires so you can turn your lights on, you know,
Yeah.
and nobody
Yeah.
cares, you
Yeah.
know. Nobody goes by and says, "Thank you, Mr. Electrical Worker, for keeping my lights on." And, and then when they go home and, they have their family things that they have to deal with. And it's not that their wives don't love them, but I think our culture today as a whole simply doesn't care, and I think most men feel that.
Mm. Do you feel that, Travis?
I don't have a great wife. I got great kids. I'm very,
Okay.
very close to my brother was a police detective also. We were in the
As well,
army
yeah.
together. I think so many of our problems are, again, when we're looking at this vast thing, even though 80% of suicides may have to be male, it still is a small number of society as a whole.
Mm.
And for myself, I have a great support system. And not that, I haven't had my sad times, dark times, whatever it is that we have, things that we have to go through ourselves. But I do believe that, um, and forget about, here's another thing I'll throw at you. And it seems like I'm doing more of the talking than I should. But when it comes to things like respect or what I think people sometimes take for granted, as a small business owner, I think I had mentioned to you, I had owned a couple of pubs after I had
Yeah.
retired from the police department. Something that gives me a lot of personal pride that I think a lot of people don't understand, unless, of course, they are also small business owners, is over the years, I have employed hundreds of people.
Mm.
Hundreds of people paid their rent because
Mm.
I gave them a job. It's not that they are absolutely working for me. They're putting the work in, you know? But had I not built these businesses, they would not have had jobs.
Mm.
And I think there's a bit of honor in that and
Mhm.
respect that does not get recognized, if
Mm.
that makes sense to you. And kinda what I wanted to talk to you there now about, just before I get lost, because I know I asked you to bring me back to it. How much of this male suicide today
Okay.
do you think is cultural and/or mental health? I know they hold hands, you
Yeah.
know, but
Yeah.
is it a lot of it where men in general are simply saying, "I've had enough," and giving up, and that they're not, I hate to use the word crazy, they're not out of their minds, they're not, it's just like, "I've had enough, I'm checking out," as
Mm.
opposed to truly being mentally ill where medicine, could take place. Because it seems to me it should be more conversation than medicine. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I think that, I think that suicide is an incredibly complicated behavior. So first of all, we have to sort of enter into our understanding of it, just holding up our hands and paying some deep respect to kind of the complexity of, in terms of the repertoire of behaviors that humans do, like something, for example, me going and making a cup of tea, not many factors go into that.
Mhm.
But when it comes to a behavior like suicide, it sits way at the other end of the spectrum. So many different factors can come into that, and I experience so much kind of diversity in terms of the stories that I hear. So I'll hear about men who were very successful, very wealthy, successful in terms of job
Yes.
and career position. Other men who've, really struggled with unemployment and housing issues, financial issues. Um, I've spoken to men that think that getting help is, it expresses some kind of weakness and therefore they don't want to do it. Other men who are absolutely desperate to get help but can't afford it, or there aren't any services in their area. So these are just little ways in which, you know, when we talk about suicide and when we talk about male suicide, it's to acknowledge that there's kind of huge diversity within that. And I think that for me, whilst having said how complicated and diverse it is, if I'm trying to express what suicide is in its simplest way, then the way I understand it is a person that is experiencing too much pain, that they don't know how to regulate it, how to cope with it, and that in that immersion of pain, intensity of pain, it can feel in certain moments like suicide is the only way with which to resolve or find relief from that pain. So for me, suicide is a crisis in a way of pain management. And that pain sits within an individual body and brain. When I'm in a moment of suicidal crisis, it's happening to me, it's happening inside of me. And so, of course, it's in some ways a mental health issue. If we understand mental health to be around our ability to regulate our thoughts and feelings in a way that keeps us relatively healthy. In my moments of suicidal crisis, I'm not able to do that. So, yes, in some ways, I don't think that I'm mentally ill, but I am having some kind of um, struggle that's rooted in my body in
Yes.
terms of my pain management. But now, when we think about the roots of people's pain, where did the pain of that person who's suicidal come from? Its roots are in so many different places.
Yes.
Its
Yes.
roots are in can be in the families that we grew up in. It could be in the schools that we went to, the teachers that we had, the peer experiences that we had, the socioeconomic conditions that we were born into, the political situation, the cultures, other aspects of my identity that are culturally discriminated against. There's so many external places in which that pain is rooted, and so it's understanding suicidal crisis as suicidal pain is, yes, something that relates to the mental health of a person. In the sense of understanding mental health as someone's ability to manage their thoughts and feelings, not through a lens of illness. Because I have to say, Travis, the men that I speak to, some men find the framework of mental illness really, really helpful. It's Travis. At the end of the day, you each one of us has to understand, has to make sense of what's happening inside of me
Yes.
and why. And then through that understanding, get better tools for managing and coping with it. And those and that's going to happen for different people in different ways. So some men, it really helps them to understand what's going on for them through this framework of mental illness, and medication then could be has I've spoken to men that it's been a big part of their sort of ability their toolkit for coping. But I've spoken to a lot of men as well that really don't understand what's going on for them through that lens of mental illness. They don't understand, it doesn't resonate with them to be told that they're mentally ill when they've got financial pressures that are, um, that are absolutely crushing them, or housing issues, or relationship problems, or childhood experiences that are eating away at their brain. Those are the the language that I always find in my experience that that men reach for is this language of pain. Almost every man that I've ever spoken to is um, able to talk about his experience through this kind of framework of pain, if that makes sense,
Hmm.
because it is what that is. It's a pain inside, and it's an inability in certain moments to be able to cope with that pain. And the thing that I think is one of the biggest violences culturally happening to men is that um, some of the best pain relief is to go to somebody and say, "I'm in pain,"
I agree.
and as a society and culture, built a fucking brick wall around that avenue for men and said, "No, you don't need to do that." And so we just cut off one of the key lifelines for half the population. Because, Travis, it is painful to be a human being. It's glorious, it's wonderful, it's beautiful, it's majestic at times, but a lot of the times it can be really, really difficult. And as we spoke about before we came on, for me, it's completely normal that people at certain points in life go, wow, this feels like a lot. And I don't know that I can endure it anymore. I understand that completely. So for me, there's this kind of balance that we have to hold around normalizing those thoughts and feelings and also taking them very, very seriously. Because when they, certainly for me, when they do descend, it's very consuming, state to be in. So it's normalizing whilst also taking it very seriously, if that makes sense.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, yes. I get it.
Mm,
Um, on that note, let's just take a break real quick, okay? And let our listeners digest what you just threw at them, and we're gonna
sure.
come right back in a couple of minutes and continue this conversation. We'll be right back, everybody.
You are.
Hey, how you doing? It's me again, another nobody, Travis Myers. And today we're going to talk whiskey. I know most of you think of me as an all-American patriotic type guy, and you are right. But when it comes to whiskey and drinking whiskey, which I do, I always go for the Irish stuff. And my choice when it comes to the Irish stuff is Powers Irish Whiskey. Established back in 1791, it's a triple distilled, oak aged whiskey. Powers is simply magic. It also happens to be the #1 selling whiskey in Ireland, which has got to say something, because if it's good enough for the Irish, it's good enough for you. So the next time you raise a glass, fill it with Powers, and think of me, another nobody, Travis Myers. Hey there, true crime fans. Let me introduce you today to the Cold Case Initiative. The Cold Case Initiative is a foundation that donates money to smaller police agencies all over the country. It does this in order to offset the costs of scientific, forensic, and DNA testing with the hope of solving cold case homicides and other horrific violent crimes that otherwise would remain unsolved. Please, if you have it in your heart and a little money to spare, go to www.coldcaseinitiative.org. Again, that's www.coldcaseinitiative.org, and lend a hand where it truly is needed. Be a part of solving a cold case. Every little bit helps. Know that 100% of the donations that go to the Cold Case Initiative go to agencies that are desperately in need of the help. So please, if you can, do the right thing and make a donation. Thanks, and all the best, my friends. This is a 2024 American Eagle gold coin, which I bought along with several others last year. I'm very happy to report that its value has gone up over 40% in the first year. See, I was encouraged to buy some gold by a financial advisor friend who suggested I be more diversified with my investments. She said gold and silver was a very safe place to park some money, as well as a good hedge against inflation. So I took her advice, and all I can say is I wish I had bought more, as it's been so very, very good to us so far. Now, I purchased these gold coins from the good people over at stackingboise.com, who could not have been nicer, more knowledgeable, or more helpful. Now, I'm certainly no financial expert, but I will say from experience, if you're looking to make an investment, buy yourself some gold. And some real gold that you could hold in your hand, just like this coin you see here. And if you do, then do like I did and get with the good folks over at stackingboise.com. I'm telling you, they're good people, they took good care of me, and they'll take good care of you. Again, that's stackingboise.com. And hey, tell them Travis sent you. All right. Welcome back, everybody. I am here with my new friend, Dr. Suzy, and we are going to continue our conversation about the very, very sad subject of male suicide. Um,
Okay.
Now, what you just mentioned before the break there, Dr. Susie, was about talking, basically therapy. Because I think talking about it, getting it off your chest, is therapeutic. And
Mhm.
be it with a professional or with your peers or with the local bartender, your family members, whatever it is quite often men throughout history now have almost been forbidden to not forbidden's a big word, but culturally forbidden to talk about it because it makes you less of a man.
Mm.
In fact, I think you're connected somehow with an organization that's called,
Man up. Yeah.
but that is something that I've said that my whole life to disparagingly. Come on, man up, get over
Mm.
yourself,
Mm.
and uh, probably not the most sensitive thing to say, but it is
Mm.
what we've said time and time
Mm.
again. Now, with the my experiences with therapy, I've never sought out therapy, but I have had to go into a therapist, whenever you have a very, very serious incident in the police department, sometimes you have
Okay.
to talk to somebody.
Okay.
In When I was a very young man in junior high school, I had to talk to the school psychiatrist because I was a very truant child. I never went to school. I never had a good day of school in my life, and I fought it the whole way until I became a high school dropout at the age of 15 when I just quit school. So they would try to seek out what's wrong. I never thought there was anything wrong with me. I thought the problem was the school system. The world was the problem. Travis wasn't the problem. Maybe I was a little
Mm.
arrogant there, but that was just the way I saw it.
Mm.
But what I do find or believe, and I'd like to get your take on it, because I have gone, like, especially after 9/11, I belong to the Mount Sinai World Trade Center health program. And so yearly I go in and they check you out and they test you for, how your lungs are working, your heart's working, everything, because so many of us now are dying from the different cancers, from all the chemicals and stuff that we breathed in, after when we were down at ground zero after the 9/11 attacks. And quite often you have to talk to a therapist or a psychologist there. And not to belittle them at all, but 9 times out of 10, I'm talking to a 24-year-old who just got out of school, and this is her first job ever, and there's no way in the world, I don't care how
Mm.
educated you are, that you, young lady, are gonna know what's going on inside of my head and or my life's experience. Whereas I've heard this term now called shoulder to shoulder
Mm.
therapy, where it
Mm.
is the old group therapy where you talk to men, and because we're talking about men, you talk about 2 men and or women who are going through the same things that you have gone through, how they've dealt with it, how they haven't dealt with it. Quite often, just knowing that you're not alone in the world is a big, big plus
Oh my God.
because as much as I might wanna say goodbye to this world, I will say to you, Susie, "Well, you shouldn't do it."
Mm.
And if I say you shouldn't do it, maybe
Mm.
some of that'll bounce back, from
Mm.
the mirror onto me, and I'll say, "Well, you know what? If Susie shouldn't do it, maybe I shouldn't do it." Is
Mm.
that am I hitting
Mm.
a chord there? Is that
Yeah,
correct?
absolutely, Travis. Absolutely. I think that I think men really need other men. I think that there's not sufficient spaces in many of our communities and societies for men to have that. Um, in the UK, Travis, I don't know what's happening in America. In the UK, there is this beautiful emergence of male peer support, people in the communities that are creating these spaces where men come together in all sorts of different ways. It can be pure like talking groups that just sat in a room sharing what's going on for them. There's pie clubs, there's football, soccer clubs, car rallies, men's sheds clubs, so building woodwork together and stuff. These Travis, it's so these spaces are so sacred. They're so sacred and they are so important. And I think absolutely what you said. I remember speaking to a man who'd made a really serious attempt on his life. He shouldn't be here anymore. And he said to me one of the best conversations he ever had was when he could sit down with another man who'd also made multiple attempts, and they could talk about it and they could laugh about it.
Yes.
You know, not to in any way kind of diminish it, but it was that he was able to access some release of emotion around the experience because he was talking to somebody that he had that feeling, could really understand it. And of course, that's so important. I'm never, ever, ever going to go into a room and share my intimate pain with somebody that doesn't make me feel safe, that doesn't make me feel like that they can meet me in it.
Well, and again, not to put down a young
Mm.
female psychologist like I just did, but we are not equals. And what I mean there, not equal that I am any better than anybody else, but we are not sharing. We cannot share. How can I share something with you when you can't share it back with me, you know?
And I
And you
think,
just
yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say also in that example, Travis, I think that there certainly in how some of the stuff works in the health system here is that you're not given sufficient time with the therapist to build up the trust. Like if I
Sure.
go into a room and I see somebody that is not the sort of person that's going to make me feel like I can share those intimacies with them, it doesn't mean that we couldn't get there with time of building the relationship, building a sense of trust, me getting to know them. But if I've got a time limited 6 or 8 sessions with somebody, it's
Yes.
just, it's not impossible to, it's not possible necessarily to build up that, um, relationship. And I think that there has to be, we have to think about what it means for a man to sit down in a chair, potentially for the first time in his life,
Yes.
to admit and to say to somebody, to reveal to them the weight of what he's been, carrying. Because also our pain is often deeply, deeply historical, Travis. Like it goes back many, um, many years, and it's but yeah, it's really there's so many sort of factors I think at play, not least of all the financial obstacles for um, some men to access this stuff. Again, I think that's why these community spaces are so um, so just close the door, are so vital and important. At the same time, the way I understand it, Travis, or one of the things that sort of helps me kind of conceptualize things is to imagine that each of us carries a tank of pain inside. So you've got your own tank that you carry that holds the pain of the things that have been uniquely difficult in your life because you've had a unique set of things happen to you and you've got a unique biology. And so that all creates your unique tank of pain. In the same way that my, tank of pain is, um, unique to me. And I think that if you imagine at the top of that tank is an exposure pipe, and that is the things that have happened to you in your life, either currently or historically, that are pouring pain into your tank. And then if you imagine a regulation pipe underneath that tank that should be helping you to take pain out of that tank.
Mhm.
And there are good ways to regulate your pain, and there are ways that might provide short-term relief, like going out and getting really drunk might help you turn off the thoughts in your brain and escape, uh, for an evening. And in that moment, it might feel great, but often you're going to wake up and it's going to potentially have caused more issues for you in your life. So ultimately, you're trying to regulate your pain through mechanisms that are actually increasing your exposure. And
Yes.
then if you imagine, Travis, that every single one of us has a threshold limit to how much pain we can hold into our tank. So if you're experiencing high exposure and ineffective regulation tools, then you're in danger of hitting that threshold. And every one of us, in a way, has to work out. what are my pain exposures? What have they been? What are they currently? How can I understand them better? How can I manage them better? And often, being able to work with a therapist to explore that, to understand that, can be really valuable, Travis. But I say that respectfully for the financial barriers that can exist, and also respectfully, Travis, for how painful the therapy in itself can be. Because
Oh,
sometimes you're going back to things that you've emotionally cut yourself off from, because it was the best way to cope in certain situations. Um,
well, I've also read about, and again, so many things. It's amazing the amount of information we get now, but almost a little bit about. And again, I'm not putting therapists down.
yeah,
Please, listeners, don't think if you think you need therapy, please do seek therapy. But there is a almost now well, it's called therapy culture, is what they're coining it as,
right, yeah,
where this therapy culture, almost in a way, um what is I don't wanna say babies you, okay? But it creates a thing where it validates all of your,
mm,
um, emotions, feelings, or whatever, and actually strengthens them, okay? Making things worse. Does that make sense to you? Am I wording that properly?
yes, yeah, I understand.
Do you see that
Yeah,
quite often in your own research where there are quite often, and this is kinda going off on a tangent a little bit, but
yeah,
it came, this thing where, oh, we see it so much now with young people who are feeling, you know, despondent for so many different reasons, okay? But rather than being told by a therapist, "Look, here are your problems A, B, and C that you need to rectify them," they coddle them, and they
mm,
feel that, they allow you to bathe and ruminate in your problems as opposed to get out of them. Now, I would imagine it's very, very different if you're talking to a 22, 24-year-old man and or woman about your problems, which to me or you as grown adults may think, "Well, your problems aren't that bad, kid. You just
mm,
have to get, for lack of a better word, get over them." But something that I learned years ago, to anyone, a problem is a very serious problem to them, even though it may not be for somebody else. But therapists today quite often are encouraging them to ruminate and dwell in their problems. Whereas for somebody who is now, let's say, in their 40s or 60s, their problems are quite real, be it financial, maritable, children, health, etc., etc. And again, but the point still being encouraged to ruminate in your problems rather than solve your problems is not helpful at all.
mm.
I hope I
Yeah,
expressed myself properly there.
yeah. You did, and I think that I mean, I always sorry, this thought, um, um, Travis, I think each person needs to go on their own journey, like I say, to be able to manage their pain better.
Mhm.
And one of the best things that someone ever said to me about therapy was a man who said that how much that talking about his feelings with somebody else had helped him talk about his feelings to himself better. So he was able to have better conversations with himself about what was going on for him and for what and why, and therefore to make better decisions then about what he wanted to do in relation to what he was then, um, feeling. But I think, yeah, it's
I can understand that 100%.
mm,
I can see it in myself. I can see it in my brother who's my age and has gone through literally every experience I have, growing up together. Um, that uh, I am capable of so much more insight and self-reflection, if you will. I can see looking back, I can see the difference in me between being 30, 35 and being 45. you
mm,
know? I was very much a different man,
mm,
not the same person, but I became just so much more aware of things, and now, that I'm 60, um, I do again, and luckily for me, I will say, and same for my brother Henry, luckily for him also, we just see the world in such a different light, you know? And it's all fairly positive for us.
mm,
But the thing is, to agree with your last statement, I can have much better conversations with myself now in
mm,
my own head. I can,
mm,
when things are stressful because of so many, many different experiences, getting over the financial humps of decade after decade, sometimes that were very, very tough, sometimes that were not. Worrying about your wife and kids, taking care of my mother or my mother-in-law, who I had mentioned before. Things like this, as you get through them, you know, it's the old whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger, you know?
mm, mm,
Um, but sometimes I think you have to be able to see them clearly and for what they are and see your strengths for what they are. And maybe quite often men don't and don't appreciate themselves nearly enough as they should. Again,
mm,
back to the guy who might be, have the most mundane job in the world that he does for 35 years because he took care of his family. That guy is every bit of a man as the
mm,
fireman that just came off the ladder with a woman over his shoulder
mm,
because he put in the hours. This was his
mm,
lot in life to take care of his family, and he did it.
mm,
And we need him because, again, if he's an accountant or a bank teller or whatever, when you go to the bank, you want the guy to be there,
mm,
and he's a
mm,
very important cog in our
mm,
society, you know?
mm,
And for him not to appreciate himself and the
mm,
contributions that he made to society for those 35 years is a shame.
mm,
Um, that being said too, I think something that happens a lot of times that people don't realize that man, and this happens to women too, but in particularly for men, he sacrificed so much over those years because he wasn't home with his kids, or he wasn't home with his
yeah,
wife, or he wasn't around, something that people don't realize. Again, even with the most unbearably mundane, boring, jobs in the world, you're still not home. You're still not doing what you wanna do. You're not walking in the park, you're not walking on the beach, you're not bathing your child, feeding your child, holding your wife's hand. You're not, because 'cause you're at work,
mm,
you
mm,
know? And
mm,
that's a sacrifice that should be honored, and I don't think that
mm,
it is.
mm.
There you go.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. And I think that we don't, one of the things that comes up a lot in my research is that there's not enough kind of social, cultural, understanding or respect for men's deep kind of relational needs and men's needs for connection, for the things that you've just described: bathing your child, holding your wife's hand, time together in nature. Like, I think that's been at a tremendous cost over the years to the uh, well-being of many men. And one of the things that I'm really striving to try and change in this a small way that I can to, deepen our understanding of men's social needs in those ways. But what you said about, certain men not feeling good about themselves. I mean, that comes up so much in my work,
Yes.
Travis. Really painful feelings of self, whether that's of failure or just the horror of certain things that have happened to you, been done to you by certain people, feelings of shame, guilt, anxiety, loss, grief, isolation, so much isolation, Travis, and loneliness. And I think that again, that's something where culture, um, plays a role. Even, um, I know that, you've mentioned that you owned the pubs, which in the UK used to be often predominantly male spaces,
Mhm.
community spaces that where men could gather and um, be together, share about their day, share about problems be in human contact with one another. And now, it's so expensive to go to
Yes.
the pub,
Yes.
and so those cultural spaces are kind of being lost, and they serve a deeper function than just
I just had a show come out this week where I ranted a little bit myself about, well, what did I call it? I called it the fall of the drinking culture and the decline of Western civilization. And I kinda did a short little, again, rant of my own, but I've watched over the last, I put it towards the financial decline in 2008, and since then, um, that combined with, inflation's been crazy since then, and that combined with the rise of technology and, these stupid smartphones that we have, that
yeah,
give us everything at our fingertips, and how how much it's hurt communities as a whole because people don't act in a community. There's no cohesion to the community anymore. There really isn't. We used to have a lot of things, even in the bar culture and in the drinking culture, everybody kept tabs on everybody. Even if you were the biggest jerk in the place, there was the old saying, "Well, the guy might be an asshole, but he's our asshole." He was still one of us, and
yeah,
people needed that. People really did, and especially working men, especially older people who, had no families or were widowers or whatever the case may
yeah,
be, they had they had nothing else in life. And it didn't have to be a pub. It could be, again, any sort of a club, a coffee club in the mornings. Yeah, I go to diners still, and they're starting to fade there too. Where
right,
I think I had mentioned to you before we went on air. I don't think I mentioned it recently, but it was a beautiful thing. I was coming back from CrimeCon in Denver, Colorado, and I came across 2 different diners. One had a big banner up where it was Veterans Coffee on Wednesdays. Veterans could come in and coffee was free. And another place I was going and I stopped in and just on accident, this is where I had breakfast that morning, and they had veterans breakfast once a month. I don't know if it was like the first Saturday of the month or something like that. Breakfast was on them for free.
yeah,
You just had
yeah,
to prove that you were a veteran, and I granted that's only for veterans that they had that, but I talked to both waitresses, and they were like, "It is packed." These guys come in because it is their big outlet to talk to other people, you know? And, I think that that is something. Well, that's what I wanted to say about the pubs for a second there. In my little bit of research that I did before I talked that, I was really surprised to find that in 2004 alone, the UK lost over 1,000 pubs. Over
right,
1,000 pubs closed in 1 year alone,
yeah,
you know?
yeah, yeah,
Granted, yes, they can't make the money that they used to make. They don't have the people coming in. Young people aren't going the way that they used to, but it's gotta be a giant loss for men in those communities not to have that little hub of activity that,
yeah,
even if you only check in, if you step in for 2 hours a day, you have somebody to commiserate with.
yeah,
To chat with, to talk
yeah,
about old times with, to tell
yeah,
stories with, to lie to, whatever it might be, and that's now, for lack of a better word, stolen from you,
mm.
you know? I think it's heartbreaking, I really do.
Travis, I think, for social creatures that desperately need community and connection, we've really done a very strange job of designing, in Western societies, modern cultures. I mean, there's so many voids of community nowadays. I mean, something that I do, um, which you don't necessarily have in America, is go and watch like non-league football in my local
Mhm.
town. And it's beautiful. I was there last night, Travis, and I was listening to the men either side of me, the conversations that they were having, that they were doing what you were describing in the pub.
Yes.
One of them's friend was really ill, and he was talking to his this other guy about it. Just this being together in this connection is so, so important, but we are really starved of spaces
Yes.
where we can gather and do that. And it's so, so important. And also the importance of community that's inclusive. Like, I really understand I think there has to be spaces where people gather with other people whose lived experiences reflect theirs. I really think men need male spaces in moments when they go and they gather and they're together. But for example, in we've talked a bit about the suicide rates, and they the reality of men being at elevated risk by dying by suicide, how apparent that is in the suicide statistics. But within that, disabled men in the UK, for example, are 4 times more likely to die by suicide than able-bodied men.
Yes.
And I'm not aware, and I'm not across all the research that's happening, but I'm not aware of any research done to kind of understand that. And so there's this whole group of men with disabilities that has been forgotten about, that is potentially not um, able to access, for example, some of these community um, spaces that exist. So it's I guess the point I'm trying to make is that the importance of trying to build inclusive communities is, really critical.
It's critical, but it's very difficult. It's very difficult, because to do something, it's tough for these things when they're not, I guess I want to say organic, you know?
Mm,
Governments can't, well, they can certainly help and they can supply money, but it's tough to force people to want to do these things. When I say people, I'm
yeah,
not talking about the old guys in the wheelchairs that need to get together. They definitely want to
mm,
do something.
yeah,
But for the local governments, the local towns, the local neighborhoods, whatever it is, to be able to put these things together, and back to like we were talking earlier, I'm not sure if we said this during the show or prior, but now, it's not, there's so many things, not just pubs, but, churches. I'm not a religious guy, but
mm,
churches once held such a good social, uh, uh, uh realm, okay,
yeah,
where people would go to church on Sunday. People would take care of the other parishioners, whether they liked them or not. They made sure they were checked on. They were taken care of. There were different programs. As a young man, we used to go to CYO, Catholic Youth Organization, and you always had to have a quarter. It was cost 25 cents, and you get a free spaghetti dinner on Fridays,
wow,
and then they had sports. They had sporting events. They had a little loungy thing with a pool table where guys could do stuff. And I always say that for me, the best part was the girls because you would meet girls that you didn't go to school with. There were girls from the neighborhood that would come in. They'd have a little, really dances were a little late for us, is like the formal dance that was more of a 50s and 60s kind of thing. I was a child of the 70s, but they would still try to do things for kids. None of this is done anymore. It's all
yeah,
over. I'm sure
yeah,
there are small pockets of communities somewhere in the country that do it, but I can't think of any in New York where
mm,
they have these things. And if you're not doing it for the teenagers, you're definitely not doing it for the senior citizens.
yeah.
You see? And it's kind of fallen away. And I find it, I really find it heartbreaking that there is, you know, again, just a lack of community and caring as a whole.
I always say, Travis, we are each other's greatest medicine,
I agree.
and to not be cultivating spaces where we can enhance and amplify our medicinal potential and
Yeah.
power for one another is really silly.
Yeah.
It's so, so silly, Travis. I have to say sometimes it's difficult. It's really, you just think, why are we, why have we come this far off track? But and that's why, Travis, people often say to me, "Oh, it must be really difficult doing what you do emotionally." And Travis, don't get me wrong, of course there are moments my heart breaks for families that have lost somebody, for men, for the horrific challenges that they've lived through, for the pain that they're carrying. Of course, there's moments of great, great sadness, but I'm meeting all of the time such insightful, wise, um, compassionate, caring people that we don't always share. We have different views on things and perspectives, but there's that root, this kind of drive to want to use the pain to try and find a better way of, being. And I get so much um, sustenance from particularly these community groups that I keep talking about. But when I meet men who are taking care of other men and letting themselves be cared for by other men and
Yes.
making that kind of grassroots changes in their communities, that just it's I have to keep going back to that and not getting overwhelmed by the bigger picture of politically what's happening and all of the violence in the world, and to keep going back to um that heartbeat of goodness and that heartbeat of compassion. That I mean, Travis, it runs so deep in you, right? All of the work that you've done, which has been dangerous work, and I'm sure at times psychologically really challenging,
Mhm.
because you must have seen some really, really difficult things that you
Oh,
didn't have
sure.
to see because
Yes.
you were in a job that meant, you could have been in another job that meant you didn't have to see it. You made a choice to um, be in professions of service to um, of protection. And I think that, sometimes we lose sight of just how much um, goodness there is. I'm saying that to myself as much as to anybody else,
But
but
I think a lot of times, I don't think you and I today, by any means, are gonna solve any problems, you know?
yeah,
But I think what you and I have done today is exactly what needs to be done, is that we need to talk, and
yeah,
talk, and talk, and talk, and
yes,
understand, and make it okay for other people to talk and to
yes,
understand. And then there's an old saying that I kinda like too, "Charity begins at home."
mm,
Okay, and what I mean by that, because that sounds a little bit selfish, but let me explain, where you just seconds ago mentioned how you have to divorce yourself from the horrors and the problems that are worldwide. Again, back to the phones and the media, we're constantly having things jammed down our throats that are literally tens of thousands of miles away that we could
mm,
never in a million years have. There's nothing we could do to save the world at
mm,
all.
right,
Nothing at all we can do to save the world, but we can, each and every one of us can make a difference just today in an individual's life by simply saying, "Good morning. How are
mm,
you? How have you been? Do
mm,
you need a hand help with anything? Can I help you out? Help you with the groceries home from the supermarket." Any little bit of kindness, respect, understanding, um, really can make a difference in an individual's life, you know?
mm,
I'm certainly never gonna be able to save the world. I couldn't save New York. I certainly couldn't save the Bronx,
mm,
and
mm,
you are in no position to save the world or to save
mm,
Edinburgh by any means. That's where you live,
mm,
correct? Edinburgh? You know? So
yeah, yeah,
but if you can make, some old fella or some old lady or some young guy who's down on his luck, make him feel better for today, well, that might last.
yeah,
He
and
might take
yeah,
he might take that and do a good deed, but, that'll kinda pay it forward kinda
mm,
thing, you know?
mm,
And I do believe that as much as evil, rotten, nasty shit can be a cancer on society, I think goodness could be a cancer too. And if
yeah,
you do just show a little compassion and a little heart, it can go a long way.
absolutely. And
Uh,
let us never lose sight of that. And let us really understand that a group of people that have been forgotten, I think, sometimes in us showing up in compassion, kindness,
yes.
is men struggling with these thoughts and feelings. So I hope more and more we're able to show up for them and be alongside them as best we can, or at least to tell them that they're not alone and that
Yeah.
people care.
Well, Dr. Susie, I'd like to thank you, okay, for coming on and talking to my listeners, and hopefully we'll encourage them to let people in their world, other people in their world, know that they're not alone, because
Yeah.
we're not. We're in
Mm,
this together in the long run.
mm,
So
mm. Thank you, Travis. It's been a pleasure.
it has been, and I hope to do it again sometime.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, dear. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
There you go. Dr. Susie Bennett has left the podcast, everybody. I personally really enjoyed sitting with her, regardless of the topic. I felt I learned a little, and I hope you did too. She's a really great gal who is doing some really, really important work. And man, do I wish we had more Susie Bennetts in the world. Now, in the event anyone out there feels they are in need, or anyone they know is in need of some help, or at risk of suicide, please, please know it's not the way to go. There are so many people you can talk to, and I promise you tomorrow is another day, and life can and absolutely will change. Just reach out and give it a chance. Dr. Susie works with an awesome online team called Man Up, and they can be reached at www.manup.how. You can also call 988 Lifeline if you need to. And another fella you may be interested in, rather interested in following, for all you Instagrammers out there, is George of the Tin Men, who we mentioned more than once on this program. Please check him out on Instagram at the Tin Men. George is a real decent guy who I had a conversation with a few weeks ago, which you can listen to, I believe, on episode number 28, wherever you listen to podcasts, and of course, on the Four Boston's Media channel on YouTube and or Rumble. So, until next week, do the right thing. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and all the best, my friends. So, due to our overwhelming popularity, thanks to you, our listeners, we are getting questions in from all over the place. The problem is, some come in over here, some come in over there, so what we've done, okay, is something new. We have Question Travis Today at gmail.com. Again, that's questiontravistoday@gmail.com, where you can send all your questions in, and I will do my best to answer them. Thank you so much for listening. It really means a lot to us. All the best, my friends. Hey, how you doing? Another nobody here, Travis Myers. This one's going out in particular to all my drinking friends out there, because I got a new favorite thing, and it's called Shanky's Whip, and it is magical. It's Irish whiskey mixed with a little caramel, a little cream, a little vanilla, and it's heavenly. What more can I say? I suggest you pick up a bottle. You can have it as a shot with a cold beer, like I like. On the rocks, it's great. Mix it with a little cola. I promise you, you're going to love this stuff. Next time you raise a glass, think of me, another nobody, Travis Myers. Hey, do the right thing. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any more of my nonsense. All the best, my friends.
Buy our books!
Listen up. This one's important. I'd like to try to encourage you, please, to give to the Stephen Siller Foundation, Tunnel to Towers, at T2T.org. That's letter T, number 2, letter T.org. Do good for those who've done good for you.